In his great book, Don Miguel Ruiz, he makes this powerful statement. He says this: if you are not aware that your mind is full of wounds and emotional poison, you cannot begin to clean and heal the wounds, and you will continue to suffer. That's what we're going to talk about today. So if you're ready to learn with me, let's dive in. Let me start with this question. Have you ever seen a brother going bald and he just won't let it go? I remember a couple years ago watching LeBron playing basketball, and when you see that camera view from the top, you could just see LeBron was just trying to hold on to that hair that he had. Now, the only reason I can say that, and the only reason I can bring LeBron James up and talk about him holding on to that bald head or holding on to that hair, was because I was that same man. I remember when I was first starting to go bald in my 20s. And I remember during that time period, look, I was going to the barber probably every 4 days. I was going to the barber. I was spending almost nearly $200 a month going to the barber, getting a clean haircut. And what's funny about that time is going through that season in life, even though I knew my hair was going, even though I knew that we was getting down to the end of the road, for some strange reason, I did not want to face reality. I didn't want to look at the fact that this is what was happening. And my barber, God bless his soul, every time I came in that chair, he never called me out about it. He never made me feel bad about the fact that I kept holding on to this hair. But there were a lot of times where he would make these comments and he would say, Nick, I think it might be about time for you to chill on this. I mean, yeah, you're giving me that money. Yeah, you're, giving me almost $200 a month, but I think it might be time to face reality on the fact that you can't hold on to this any longer. And so I thought about that situation. I thought about people like LeBron. I thought about brothers that we see that want to hold on to that hair. And, it made me think about, why was it so hard for me to face reality? Why was it so hard for me to just simply get down to the fact that I can't hold on to this hair anymore? And even though this is a funny story, it makes me understand that there was an issue that I had with just being self-aware, right? And being myself and understanding where I was at in life and actually accepting that reality in life, because everybody else around me could see that it was happening. Every time I sat down in that chair, my barber could see when I sat down that the hair was going away. If I let my hair grow out for too long, it was looking like a chocolate donut on top of that joint. And my barber saw it, everybody else saw it, but for some reason, I wasn't self-aware enough to see it and really just kind of let this go. And so if you're like me, you know what? There's a strong chance that there are many situations that happen in life that are like this, where you really don't know yourself as well as you think you might know yourself. And the scary reality is, when we think about self-awareness, oftentimes the people that are closest to us, they might know us better than we know ourselves. And if we want to grow, and if we want to make our relationships more enjoyable, more fulfilling, something's going to have to change. We're going to have to learn how to become more self-aware. And in this episode of the Life Recreated podcast, I want to dive into why we don't know ourselves as well as we think we do. And then secondly, I want to talk about how changing one word in the questions that we ask ourselves can actually grow our self-awareness. I ran across this article on the Harvard Business Review. And I mean, it's Harvard Business Review, so some of the words was all big and it was kind of confusing to look at and read. But anyway, I read through it. And in this article, what they did was they did some research, and they took 5,000 participants and they asked them a whole bunch of questions, and they did 10 separate investigations. And this investigation was on self-awareness. They were trying to figure out how self-aware people really are. And the results to me were stunning, man. They just completely blew my mind, because out of 5,000 people that they researched and asked these questions to, what they found out was that only about 10 to 15% of these individuals that were studied were actually self-aware. They even stated in the article this, they said, even though most people believe they are self-aware, self-awareness is truly a rare quality. So when I read that, I was like, okay, so we interviewed about 5,000 people. We seen that only about 10% of them to 15% are actually self-aware. So that means to tell me, like, if we were to use that 5,000 and use that as kind of like an example of what we see in society or what we see in culture, that would mean that out of 10 people that we see, only one of those people, one of those persons actually have some kind of self-awareness. And that was mind blowing to me because, look, I'm gonna be honest, I've always thought that I was a self-aware individual. You know, obviously in my example of me holding on to my hair, I'm not a self-aware individual, but it was mind-boggling that so many of us are walking around thinking that we're self-aware, thinking that we actually know ourselves. But according to the science and according to this research, it's really the opposite. A lot of us don't know ourselves as well as we think we do. And like I said before, if I want to enjoy life more and if I want to enjoy my relationships more, self-awareness is going to be one of the things that I'm going to have to learn and have to master and really get acquainted with in my life. But my question when I was reading this was, okay, if only 10% of us, right, are actually self-aware and actually have that quality, why in the world is that happening? Why is this such a dilemma for us to kind of understand who we are and be able to accept that and be able to come to the reality of that? And when I thought about that, I realized that, you know, for self-awareness, for most of us, self-awareness can be a painful process. I go back to my example of going bald, right? I always prided myself on having a clean haircut, having a fresh lineup. I mean, there's something about going to the barber, sitting in that chair, going in there all raggedy, hair looking all nappy, and him taking some clippers or her taking some clippers, a comb, a brush, and completely transforming how you look. I mean, if you've ever had a good barber and you've ever had somebody that knows how to line you up and knows how to make you look right, there is no better feeling when you get out of that chair. I remember getting out of that chair feeling like a new man, feeling like a new individual. And so in order for me to be self-aware of the fact that I was losing my hair and that I would no longer get this opportunity to get lined up and be clean like that anymore, that's a painful process. You know, if you think about it, it's a process of taking 100% responsibility of who you are so that we can make some kind of change in our life. When we talk about like healing, when we talk about our emotional journey and our emotional healing, taking responsibility and becoming self-aware 100% of that, that's a hard thing to do, right? And when you really think about it, in order for us to heal and in order for us to become who we were meant to be, it requires us taking 100% responsibility. It requires us to look in the mirror and really get down to the nitty-gritty of who we are. And I feel like that's why a lot of times it's so hard for us to do that. I mean, because think about it. Who really wants to kind of look in the mirror at some of the flaws that we have? Who really wants to kind of look at like some of the mistakes that we've made and some of the ways that we may have treated people or things that we have said or you know, things in our past? A lot of times, like, we don't really want to face those things, and the reason why is because they hurt. Let's be real. Like, there's things that I know I've done in my past and situations that I've been in my past that me having to face those things and me having to really look at what I did and really just focus in on like who I am and the things that I have in my life and the things that I've done in my life, that is a painful process. That's a process that can sometimes really, really hurt. And so in thinking about that, I understand why when we look back on this whole the study that they did, it can be understanding now why out of all those people, only 10% of us are really willing to be self-aware. But like I said in the beginning, if we are going to change, and if we are going to find that fulfillment and that joy out of life, self-awareness is a requirement for us to be able to face in our life. But as we move on, my question after that became, okay, even though it's a painful process, let's say it's a painful process. Let's say, you know what, it's hard for us to really look at ourselves and really kind of dig down into who we are. But let's say you're a person that says, you know what, I understand that it hurts, but I'm willing to take that next step. I'm willing to really discover like who I am. I'm willing to really kind of dig into who I am. I'm ready to kind of take off all of the, you know, the stuff, because guess what? Let's be real with each other. A lot of times we put out things into the world that are not really us, right? Before I was even recording this podcast, I was thinking to myself, you know, I was sitting down with my wife. I had her like looking over my notes, and she's going through it. And she's just like, why you got all these words in here? Like, what are all these like big words and all this stuff? And I realized something that, you know, as I'm preparing for this, I am trying to put myself or trying to portray that I kind of know something rather than just being me. And I realized that for myself, one of my struggles is being willing to put myself out into the world, like who I really am out into the world, because, you know, many a times we're afraid of how people are going to take that and how people are going to receive that. But I started to realize that that's way out of my control, right? I can't control how somebody responds or how somebody reacts or how somebody receives me as an individual. All I can control is my output. All I can control is who I am. And so if I want to become self-aware, I had to realize that like we need to take those steps in order for us to become self-aware. So if we're at that point, we say, you know what, I want to become self-aware. I want to do that, right? I know the pain's there. I know it's going to hurt. How do I move on? And we start this process, but then we realize that we're not really becoming self-aware. We're not growing in self-awareness. I started to think about, well, what's the problem there, right? If it's hard for us to do it because it can be painful sometimes, but we're willing to take the step and actually become self-aware in our lives, then why are so many of us lacking that self-awareness when we do start this process? And in this article and in life, I just started realizing is that sometimes the problem that we have with the questions that we're asking ourselves in order to become self-aware are the wrong questions. Sometimes we're asking the wrong questions when it comes to us learning how to become self-aware. Because so think about when things happen in our lives, where do we, like, say for instance, we make a mistake, say for instance, we have a situation that doesn't kind of play out, doesn't pan out the way that we're thinking it will. One of the main things that we focus on, and one of the main things that we typically ask ourselves is, why is this happening? Right? Think about some of the questions that we ask ourselves. We ask ourselves, you know, why did I do such a stupid thing? You know, why can't I figure out this money thing? And why can't I figure out how to handle my money and handle my finances? Right? Or we might ask ourselves, why am I always like this? Why does everything go wrong for me? Why can't I be like others? Why can't I be more like others? Why can't I fit in? Why can't I get this right? Right? Why do I keep making these same mistakes? Why can't I be happy like everyone else? Why don't I deserve success? Why does life seem so unfair to me? Right? Why can't I overcome these challenges? There's all these why questions. And typically when we start with self-awareness, I believe that a lot of times we start with asking these questions to ourselves. Why can't I? Why is this? Why? And the problem that I've seen in studying this and understanding this is that when we start with these why questions, think about it. When we start with these why questions, a lot of times those why questions, they tend to lead us down this like rabbit hole of just negative thinking. Right? We start going down this rabbit hole of negative thinking. Because think about, when I ask myself a question of why do I keep making this same mistake? Well, I know for me, I start looking at all the negative things that I do. I start remembering all the mistakes. I start remembering how I couldn't get this together or how I couldn't figure this out. I start remembering how I just couldn't wrap my mind around a concept or whatever the case may be. I just start thinking about all the wrong things that I do and all the ways that I'm not able to handle whatever situation I is. And so the problem that we have with asking why isn't just the fact that it leads us down this negative, rabbit trail or negative hole sometimes. But the real problem is not just how wrong we are, but when we come up with the answer on that, it's how confident we are that we're right. So what I mean by that is this, like if I ask myself, why do I keep making these same mistakes? And my mind starts giving me the answers to those questions. Somewhere along the line, I'll take those answers and believe that those answers are really who I am, right? I'll start believing that's right. Like, because I see the evidence that I keep making this same mistake, because I see the evidence that I can't figure this situation out, then it must be true. It must be right. And the problem with that is that when I ask those why questions and my mind gives me these answers, and they're answers that only reinforce the negative things that I'm trying to change about my life, it becomes harder for me to get out of that rut. It becomes harder for me to move forward and say, you know what, even though these could be the things that are happening, or this could be the evidence for that, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's who I am, right? Those are things that I may have done or things that I may have happened, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's who I am. And so when that happens, oftentimes those why questions, they lead us to believing that the answers that our mind gives us are who we are. And so when you think about that, if my mind tells me that I'm somebody based on my beliefs, based on like what I'm seeing, based on the evidence, how likely am I to really try and change that? How likely are you to really try and change that? When you ask yourself these why questions on why you can't change the situation or why you can't get better in a situation, and you feel stuck in that situation, how likely are you to try and want to make the change that you need to make in order to move from what your mind is telling you, right, into who you really want to be and who you really want to become? It goes back to like what Don Miguel Ruiz said in his quote. He said, if we're not aware that our mind is full of these wounds and emotional poison, we cannot begin to clean and heal the wounds, and will continue to suffer. Asking these why questions oftentimes leaves us stuck in those moments where we can't move forward and we can't change. So with that being the case, I started asking the question, well, shoot, if why questions don't work, then what questions do work? If I want to become more self-aware, if I want to make those changes, if I want to heal, if I want to have more fulfilling relationships, if I want all these different things in life, and you're telling me that why don't work, then what is it that I'm supposed to do? Because these why questions, they don't create the self-awareness that we need. Then which questions do we need to ask to increase our self-awareness? And so to increase our self-awareness, we should ask what, not why. We should change just that one word and instead of us saying, why is this happening? We should change that one word to what. What is happening here? What is it in me that is causing me to react in this kind of situation right now at this moment? What is it about how this person responded to me, or how they answered me, or how they may have answered the phone? What is it about that situation that makes me feel so uneasy right now? What is it about when I go to work and I walk through the door and I feel this uneasiness around my boss or around, my coworkers? What's going on inside of me that is causing me to feel like this, right? Because if I walk into work and I say, why the hell am I here? Why I got to deal with these people? Why? Like, those aren't going to give me the answers that are going to help me to change. And those aren't going to give me the answers that are going to make me more self-aware. Realistically, if you think about it, a lot of those times, those why questions, they point more outward. They point more to the things that are external, the things that are out of our control, the things that that a lot of times we can't even really get access to, man, because there's things that are triggering us, things that happen in our past, all these things that are in our mind that when we ask these why questions, sometimes we can't get the access to what we need in order for us to be self-aware, in order for us to change. So changing from why to what puts our minds in a whole different mind frame. So think about it like this. When I ask what, not why, it oftentimes it shifts my focus from the things that I can't control, so the things that are outside of me, to the things that I now can control. And I believe that when you talk about self-awareness and when you think about self-awareness, the main thing that we're trying to get to in self-awareness and understanding self-awareness is being able to take back control to the things that I can change, the things that you can change. Listen, because when we think about life, we're not stuck where we're at right now. So many times we get in these seasons in our life where we think that the way things are going to be the way they're going to be forever. And that is completely not true. On this healing journey, as we're going through life, as we're trying to navigate through this, look, the way that we are now can always change. It's always changing. We're always evolving. We're always we should always be moving forward. We shouldn't have to keep being stuck in the same rut, in the same position, in the same lack of self-awareness. But when we change that one word and we start asking those what questions, it puts us in a different mind frame. Think about this. When I start asking, what can I do about this situation? It makes the situation more objective. Rather than it being something completely out of my sphere, completely out of my control, it helps me to narrow in on the things that I can control. It helps me to look and focus on the things that I do have control over. Those what questions completely help me to change the situation. And if we're thinking about self-awareness, that's really what we're after here, right? We're able to, with those what questions, we're able to start taking back the power. When I ask those questions on what I can do about this, instead of saying why this is happening to me, it completely makes me look at things in a whole different way. See, because the reality of it is that we have more power in changing our situation than we really think we do. Our mind has this way of making us feel by the questions that we're asking ourselves. Our mind has this way of making us feel like we can't change things or that things are going to be the same way forever. And in all reality, man, that is completely far from the truth. When we make this shift, everything becomes more objective. And then overall, it helps me to become more self-aware. Because now as I'm asking myself these what questions instead of these why questions, I start looking and pointing out what I can control, what I can change. What can I change about my relationship? If I don't like something, the way something is going on, I'm not going to sit here and say, why is my wife acting like that? Why can't she do this? Why do I respond like that in a situation? Why do I, like, let's say, for instance, I get mad about something or I go off the handle about something. Instead of me being like, why did that make me upset? I might look at that situation and say, okay, what was it about that situation that caused me to feel a certain way? And when I start asking my mind those questions, my mind starts giving me answers to say, oh, Nick, hey, do you remember back in 2003 when this happened to you and X, Y, and Z, right? And then that links to this. And then I can say, okay, well, if that is the case, then that tells me that now I have the power to change my story, to change my beliefs, to change how I'm feeling about this situation so that I can respond differently, so that I can look at it differently. So if I go back to that article that we read about only 10% of us being really self-aware, I feel that when we are able to make that shift and start asking those different questions on what instead of why, it can begin to help us to really shape how we want to believe about our world and our situations and the things that we're experiencing. I hope that makes sense. But when I look at that and I think about that, it was powerful to me because it helped me to start changing the way that I started asking myself these questions. Instead of saying why, I started asking what. Now, as we kind of bring this to the surface, I want you to think about your life and the areas that you want to improve, the areas and the things that you want to get better at. It could be relationships, it could be at work, it could be in your career, it could be, with your money, it could be with your finances, it could be whatever it is, it could be with your healing, it could be with how you deal with your emotions, whatever it could be in your life. I want you to think about those situations that are in your life, and I want you to start thinking about the questions that you ask yourself around those situations. When these things pop up, when drama pops up with your partner, when beef starts happening at work, whatever it could be, instead of asking why is this happening, instead of asking why is this person doing this, instead of asking, why can't I figure this out? Why do I keep making this mistake? I want you to start asking these what questions. What's happening here? What's making me feel this way? What makes this such a challenge for me to overcome? See, like when I ask that question right there, what makes this such a challenge for me to overcome? My brain goes to a whole different thing. My brain goes to a whole different segment and says, okay, well, if this is a challenge for me to overcome, then I can obviously find some skills that can help me to overcome these challenges. And now I can be aware of my skills, of what I'm doing. See, that's the power in just shifting that one word in the questions that we ask ourselves so that we can become self-aware. As we bring this to a close, and I'll bring this to a close, listen, I want to encourage you. All it takes a lot of times is just that small shift in our thinking to make some really big changes in our lives. That's the thing that I'm really grasping along my own healing journey, is that all these things that I felt were so overwhelming and so hard and so difficult to overcome, I'm realizing that it's just taking some of these small shifts in the way that we think, in the way that we approach our situations, and the way that we handle our emotions that can help us to grow in the way that we're meant to be and grow in the way that we want to be, right? And so that starts with our self-awareness. So make that shift in your life this week. As you go about your day, make the shift. Start asking what, not why. What, not why? What's going on here? And see what the difference is. See how aware you become of yourself, and then see how everything around you might change. You might end up throwing out some beliefs and some junk and some trash that you had in your mind that you've been thinking about in a certain way for so many years, that when you just start asking those questions on what, you start realizing how aware you become of yourself, how aware you become in all your interactions. And so I hope that helps this week. Change that, shift that mindset to what, not why. Let's become more self-aware. Listen, as men out there, we need to do this. We definitely need to do this. I'm gonna tell you, we need to do this because our families need us, our society needs us, our culture needs us. I mean, everybody needs us to become more self-aware so that we can help others, so that we can actually invest in our communities, invest in the people that love us, invest in those that are close to us by becoming more self-aware. So that's all I got for you today. Until next time, this is Nick, Life Recreator Podcast. Do me a favor, man, if you got some value out of this and it made sense to you, drop a comment down below. Let me know what you think about that. Let me know about what you think about self-awareness. Or shoot, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you are more self-aware than I'm really thinking, right? Maybe that's the case. But let me know down in the comments below. And until next time, this is Nick with the Life Recreator Podcast. Keep learning, keep healing, and keep growing. Peace.